Welcome back. When violent mobs shut down Arden Fair Mall 2 nights in a row at the end of the year, we heard you. Hundreds of you shared your thoughts for ways to keep it from happening again. Take a look. Many of you were like Kevin, who said, start by actually putting these punks in handcuffs. No arrests in both incidents. Nonsense, he said. So tonight, for the first time, we're hearing terrifying 911 audio of a mother with her newborn in the car pleading for help as large crowds jumped on her car. Police Chief Daniel Hahn admits he's embarrassed by the whole thing, and he responds directly to the concerns raised by viewers like Kevin. Here now is Mall Melee.
Starting date Wednesday, December 26, 2018, 18 hours 9 minutes.
911, what is the location of your emergency?
At Arden Mall, in front of BJ's.
We have somebody that's going shopping at a mall, and now I wonder, will she go back shopping there? Or will she go to another city?
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
It's getting loud and everyone's running and screaming. My baby, my newborn baby and I are in here.
On one hand, I'm a little embarrassed that she had to go through that in the city that we all live in and love.
There's a fight. It's like almost like a riot.
No arrests made. Why doesn't the chief send a message? Some will say. What do you say to those folks? Sacramento Police Chief Daniel Hahn sitting down with me to offer his first public comments about the brawls that shut down Arden Fair Mall 2 nights in a row.
I'm hiding in my car. I'm so freaked out.
And at what point do people start hitting the gas and running people over? And that's not good for anybody either.
Oh my God. Please bring somebody to
About how many people are fighting?
Oh my God. There's like 50 to 100 people. I'm not kidding. There's a lot of people.
You still feel no arrest was the right thing to do?
Well, under the circumstances, we make arrests, and there might be arrests coming out of that. We're still investigating a lot of those things. So if people were doing things like jumping on cars or being violent, and we can identify them and arrest them, they are going to get arrested. We're still investigating a lot of those incidents. And so I think we as a community have to find solutions to where our young people don't go to the mall and do that.
Can I get you to sign this here to say you're a registered voter?
Well, our cameras went along as Daryl Roberts with the Roberts Family Development Center went back to the mall getting signatures to set aside money in the city's budget for a Sacramento Children's Fund, hopefully to help with things like mentoring and job training.
The Arden Mall stuff, I was there when it happened, and it was scary, and it's like sad because you see kids that are like a lot younger than I am. I'm 19.
Joy Johnson teamed up with city leaders to launch several pop-up community events for kids. As a matter of fact, more than a dozen were organized after the Mall Melee.
I feel like community, like togetherness and like being able to work together and get to know each other is more important than anything.
It's a sentiment Mayor Darrell Steinberg echoed at our annual New Year's Eve event.
The city has to provide more alternatives for young people, no question about it. We passed this Measure U in November, which provides an additional $50 million a year that we can invest in youth, in our neighborhoods, in what I call inclusive economic development.
50 million, did you say?
50 million a year. But here's the other thing. The fact that, you know, maybe during a holiday period there isn't a lot for young people to do. We need to change that, but it's still not an excuse for that kind of behavior.
Right.
We can't have that in our city because our city and our kids are better than that.
I think the silver lining, and those are obviously horrible things, and that scared a lot of people and injured a lot of people, and it is not what we want to see in our community. But I think you also saw community engaging and coming together.
My conversation with Chief Hahn continues next Thursday. We'll talk more about the challenges officers face with juveniles here in the capital city. These 12-year-olds, for example, cursing out these officers. Wait until you see the unique way police responded to this.
You already used that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did.
Wait.
So you're repeating yourself. You got to come up with some new stuff.
Young folks, you know, behaving in ways that I think you and I both know. If our mamas was to see us behaving that way, you know,
I wouldn't be here.
Right. Join us for my next special report, Juveniles, next Thursday on Late News Tonight.
Why would you do something that could wind up either causing someone to get hurt or something like that? That I don't understand. Obviously.
Let's continue my ongoing weekly series with Sacramento Police Chief Daniel Hahn. We're getting a first-hand look at what it's like policing the streets of the capital city. Newly released body cam video shows children cursing out police officers as they wait for a tow truck to come pick up a car. A warning, this may be disturbing, but it shows just how quickly things can escalate during a traffic stop.
Like this. Yeah, ribbit, yeah, ribbit your out of here, boy.
It is hard to believe those are 12-year-olds cursing out Sacramento police officers. Wait until you see the unique way police responded to this.
You already used that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did.
Wait.
So you're repeating yourself. You got to come up with some new stuff.
Young folks, behaving in ways that I think you and I both know. If our mamas was to see us behaving that way,
I wouldn't be here.
Right?
He waited for me to touch his little punk. The police, why you gonna tell my
We took that video to the community leaders in that area, and they immediately were willing to help.
Community leaders like Mervyn Brookins. So you're saying you've been there, done that?
I've been there and done that. Unfortunately, long time ago when I was a college student, I made a mistake, ended up in prison, came home with the deliberate intentions on giving back to my community and trying to right my wrong.
So what do you say then when you see these videos of these young folks coming up cursing out officers?
Hey, I don't know how y'all could be cops. I'd have beat the out of a little kid.
Shadow boxing with them in their cars. What would you say to these young folks?
I saw that video, and the beautiful thing about that situation is that prior to Chief Hahn, those young men would have been arrested, and their life would have taken on a different trajectory.
What did you do? I look like a old piece of dog. You know how when it turned like you came out.
With this type of verbal beatdown, police knew they had to take some type of action.
They called the community and said, this is a situation, can you help? So some members of Brother to Brothers and Sister to Sister as well reached out to that family, and now we're engaged in helping them young men get back on the right path. We're made up of individuals who at one time or another was on the wrong side of the law and come home, and now we're trying to give back the best way, any way that we can, whether it's mentoring,
or hosting community youth sports leagues where police serve as coaches, handing out awards like this at the end of the season. The idea is simple.
When an incident happens and an officer encounters somebody, chances are if that officer is one of the ones that were coaching in our organization, they know that family or know somebody who knows that family. So rather than being an arrest, it's, you know what, I'm gonna call your Uncle Merv, I'm gonna call Coach so-and-so. And it's really community policing. It's a beautiful thing.
Oh, I look like a skinnier and taller version of Donald Trump, boy.
The bottom line is, the way those kids were acting is not a recipe for success. So regardless whether it's a community leader or a police officer, whoever's best suited to get through to those kids and hopefully change their behavior and get them on the right track is what's going to make us successful as a community.
Sacramento Police Chief Daniel Hahn is convinced intense exchanges like this, making an arrest in the moment, can sometimes be counterproductive.
If you come from the perspective of an officer and the kids were acting like that, do you think they would just easily, willingly submit to being detained in the squad car? My guess is probably not. And so then that becomes a fight between a grown 6 foot, 200 plus pound police officer and a 12-year-old kid. And so in the climate.
And then you end up on national TV.
Oh yeah. And so the climate now is making officers at times determine, okay, in terms of purpose and what's going on right now, it's better for me to just stand there. And I couldn't be more proud of the officer that was on that call.
Hey, don't. Hey. Why would you do something that could wind up either causing someone to get hurt or something like that? That I don't understand. Obviously. You guys have a great day. Have a great day.
After
After all, in just the last year, we've witnessed massive protests sparked by the police shooting of Stephon Clark, the unarmed father of two, killed by Sacramento police who thought he had a gun. It turned out to be a cell phone. Demonstrators marched on City Hall and demanded changes from those in power.
I know the department handed over the findings from the investigation to the district attorney's office in October. The family of Stephon Clark released a statement saying in part, although you mentioned a thorough investigation, all details have been deemed private to the public. Astonishingly, these details have even been completely concealed from the Clark family, which does not promote transparency in the slightest, the family said. Your response?
With the district attorney expected to make a recommendation any day now on whether those officers will face criminal charges, Chief Hahn speaks directly to the family and makes a pledge to the community. We'll tackle the Stephon Clark shooting in my next special report, only on Late News Tonight.
And now let's continue my weekly series with Sacramento Police Chief Daniel Hahn. It's been almost a year since Stephon Clark was shot and killed by police, and the DA has yet to make a decision on the fate of those officers. And so tonight, the chief sheds some light on the steps the department is taking in preparation for an announcement that could come any day now. And he has a message for the community at large.
Stephon Clark! Our street! Our street! Our street! Let them know. Our street! Our street! Let the whole world know. Let the whole world know. It was so hard for him. You see his face?
Who can forget the massive protests sparked by the police shooting of Stephon Clark? Demonstrators shut down the interstate and kicked off a cry for justice heard around the world.
Stephon has woke up the nation. We're going to make Donald Trump and the whole world deal with the issue of police misconduct.
We're here to contest how the officers handled the situation. That man should have never been fired upon 20 times.
That was my brother 20 times. 20 times. 20 times. 20 times.
Remember, police had been chasing Clark following reports of someone breaking into cars. Officers say they believed he was armed but found only a cell phone. The issue of non-lethal weapons came up as the mayor himself shared questions from the community with Police Chief Daniel Hahn when the shooting first happened back in March.
Does the use of force investigation, will it include whether the number of shots that were fired were necessary to protect the safety of the officers?
Yes.
Those non-lethal weapons also came up the night of the shooting, after the fatal shots were fired.
Go get a non-lethal.
What do you have on him?
Like this, something in his hands. It looked like a gun from our perspective.
Just this week, California Attorney General Javier Becerra released this extensive report with 49 recommended changes for the Sacramento Police Department, including working on a policy that better defines and explains the requirements that force be used only when necessary. But he made one thing clear.
Our purpose today is not to discuss the criminal investigation of the shooting of Stephon Clark. That investigation is entirely separate and ongoing.
I know the department handed over the findings from the investigation to the district attorney's office in October. The family of Stephon Clark released a statement saying in part, although you mentioned a thorough investigation, all details have been deemed private to the public. Astonishingly, these details have even been completely concealed from the Clark family, which does not promote transparency in the slightest, the family said. Your response?
Well, first, I completely understand the family's feelings, right? They want to know all the facts. I wish I could release more details because I think that the family does deserve that. And I believe the DA and the Attorney General will do that. But the bottom line is, I will release it at the time where this is all over if somebody else does not.
So you're making that pledge
Absolutely.
at the completion of this investigation. If there is not a public release of the info, you plan to do it.
Yes, and I would have loved to do it earlier, but I want to make sure that the process is completely fair to the DA and the Attorney General so they can do their job. But absolutely, I will release it if somebody else doesn't.
Meanwhile, regardless of the outcome of the shooting investigation, the chief admits he's already made several changes, like updating the department's body cam procedures and enacting a new foot pursuit policy.
You know, there were those who kind of talked about the foot pursuit policy, basically saying it was an excuse for the officers to kind of pull back or to let the bad guys get away.
Our goal is to hold people accountable and keep our community safe. Trust me, no officer wants people that are wanted for serious crimes to get away, but we want to do it in the safest manner possible.
In a matter of weeks, the chief plans to roll out a new use of force policy as well, all in response to the Stephon Clark shooting. But with the DA's decision on whether or not those officers will face charges still pending, the chief knows this story is far from over.
Obviously, protests are a possibility. We've seen that in this city in the last year. So we have to prepare for that. Now, we prepare for the worst and hope for the best. But I will add this. I could not be more proud of many of the community leaders in our community over the last 7, 8, 9 months, and of the officers that work in this police department. Because if you saw what I've seen at some of the protests and some of the other things that have happened in our community, and the vitriol and the things that were said to the officers, and they don't respond. I mean, they're human beings. Things hurt them just like they hurt everybody else. And I think in today's society, we see a lot of division, whether it's generalizing Democrat versus Republican, liberal versus conservative, or you name it down the line by race.
Black versus white.
Black versus white, police department versus community. The only way throughout history and now that we're going to get better and be what we all need is together.
When our discussion continues next week, caught on camera, a Sacramento officer fights for his life with an armed suspect who's biting him and determined to escape. The officer follows protocol and starts his body cam, but it falls off just as things turn physical with the suspect. The chief admits these camera fails happen more than we might think. Only on Late News Tonight. Let's continue my weekly series with Sacramento Police Chief Daniel Hahn. Tonight, for the first time, he speaks publicly about the attempted murder of one of his officers back in January. It was all caught on body cam, but wait until you see what happens when things turn violent.
Alpha 47, that plate's going to come back clear. Expired on a 2001 Mercedes with a pending master file.
It all started with this traffic stop on a Sunday night. Police say they ran the plates and found the car's registration had been expired for 2 years. Watch, the suspect parks the car and then makes a run for it.
He's running through the park, southbound through the park.
The camera captures the dramatic chase on foot, but pretty soon the officer loses sight of the suspect.
47, just lost visual. Inside CV Circle here.
Just a routine traffic stop turns to potentially a deadly situation within a matter of a minute or so.
I know where he is. You're good.
Yes, things are about to escalate. When the officer finally caught up to the suspect, they got into a scuffle. The body cam actually falls off. But we can hear what sounds like threats.
There were those who might say, well, it just really seems convenient that the camera falls off right at the point of interaction. What do we take away from that, Chief?
Well, there's no perfect solution to anything. And so these body cameras, they just come off with a magnet. So it's not terribly unusual for them to fall off when you're in a physical fight. The body camera, we attach to the officers with a magnet because we don't want it to be bolted to them because then they could get hung up, a suspect can grab it.
In this case, the officer fires his taser after allegedly hearing a clicking sound, discovers the suspect has a gun.
Drop the gun! Get off me, bro. Drop the gun! Yes, I will.
So we have body cameras on every one of our officers. And even in this case, if it falls off, it's still recording everything. So we had the ability to hear the whole interaction where we didn't have that a year ago. There's been a tremendous amount of change in the police department in just the short span of a year.
Well, it was in that short span that a chase following reports of someone breaking into cars ended with Stephon Clark, an unarmed father of two, killed by Sacramento police. They thought he had a gun. They only found a cell phone. The shooting sparked major protests, and the district attorney is expected to make a decision about the fate of those officers involved any day now. I had to ask, did the Stephon Clark case have an impact on the outcome of this case?
Give him your arm now.
Consider, here we have a Sacramento officer fighting for his life with an armed suspect who is biting him and determined to escape. Police released video and pictures of the weapon they say they recovered from the suspect. The officer walked away with a few cuts and bruises, and that suspect, 33-year-old Artavius Coleman, is now behind bars.
Said he was going to shoot the officer, pulled the trigger, and so the officer did an amazing job. But that's what we want our officers to do, is stay proactive, overcome resistance, and everybody goes home.
Keep in mind, just this week, state lawmakers at the Capitol introduced a new use of force bill.
47 got him at gunpoint.
We're here to announce the introduction of AB 392, which is the California Act to Save Lives.
AB 392, if passed, would authorize officers to use deadly force only when it's necessary to prevent imminent and serious bodily injury or death. This as the Sacramento Police Department prepares to roll out a new use of force policy of their own.
So, for example, if we're looking at things like drones to search yards before we insert people, officers, into that yard to look for somebody. We already have canine dogs. Now we're looking at robots, smaller robots that we can insert into yards.
We have a police chief that's willing to listen to solutions outside of the box.
Keep in mind, that's coming from Mervyn Brookins, a guy who spent time in jail and had more than a few run-ins with police.
You say you were a special kind of stupid.
I was a special kind of stupid because I was one of those individuals that not only did I fall and get on the wrong side of the law, but I kept making mistakes.
Nowadays, instead of posing for mugshots, he's taking snapshots with the police chief, representing his Brother to Brother outreach organization.
Brother to Brother has been out at the police academy, giving them a different perspective of the individuals they're going to come serve. Brother to Brother has hosted the new recruits before they hit the streets to say, hey, this is our community.
From partnerships designed to expose officers to communities they might not otherwise interact with, to arming officers with new technology geared at promoting more accountability, Chief Hahn insists he's making changes that are reducing fatal interactions.
We want officers to perform their duties in the safest way possible, not only for the officer, but also for the suspect. And so we also implemented where we release video faster than we ever have before. And we created a research and development division that's going to research the latest, greatest ways to do things, whether it be training or equipment. And so there's several things that we've implemented after the shooting that I think will pay dividends for years to come.
When our discussion continues, exclusive video reveals utter chaos following a double homicide in downtown Sacramento near the Golden One Center. All available units respond just as they did hours earlier during a massive brawl at the Arden Fair Mall.
Oh my gosh. Okay. It's getting loud and everyone's running and screaming. My baby, my newborn baby and I are in here. There's a fight. It's like almost like a riot.
Chief Hahn talks the impacts of an increasing population and decreasing police force.
It's like 60 officers less than it was 10 years ago. And so...
And the city has grown.
And the city has grown.
Next week, only on Late News Tonight.
You know, for the past month or so, I've been having weekly conversations with Sacramento Police Chief Daniel Hahn. Tonight, I asked him to grade his performance, and you might be surprised by his answer. He also talks about the, shall we say, creative ways the department is tackling crime with fewer officers.
Hey, if we got
Talk about utter chaos following a double homicide in downtown Sacramento near the Golden One Center. All available units respond, just as they did hours earlier during a massive brawl at the Arden Fair Mall.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
It's getting loud and everyone's running and screaming. My baby, my newborn baby and I are in here. There's a fight. It's like almost like a riot.
I wanted to chat with Sacramento Police Chief Daniel Hahn about the impacts of an increasing population and decreasing police force in the capital city.
You know, we went through a tough economy several years back, and officers were laid off and staffing wasn't hiring going on. So we're still trying to catch up from that. It was like 60 officers less than it was 10 years ago. And so,
And the city has grown.
And the city has grown.
Is Sacramento becoming a more dangerous community?
I think it might feel like it's not safer because of social media and the ease and access to information.
And yet, despite these types of headline-grabbing cases of a fatal shooting near a main attraction in the city center, the chief says crime is actually down.
We have less homicides every year for the last 4 years than we had before. This is the first year in 35 years where no juveniles were murdered in our city. So I think in one way you can say it is getting better and it's working. And it's not just because of the police department, it's because us as a community as a whole are making our community safer.
He points to things like the Cops and Clergy program that has recently expanded to include concerned citizens. It's now being called the Community Engagement Academy. Pastor Anthony Sadler helped launch the program.
It's not the one thing, but it's one of many things that can be done to help change the dynamics and make our community a better place for our young people and old alike.
19 community and faith-based leaders spend 7 weeks in the academy, and then they graduate as what you might call new agents on the force.
They're change agents. They're to go out and affect this world and turn our city in a positive manner based on the new knowledge that they have.
I'm sure they have kids and grandkids and relatives and families that they could be spending time with. But they chose to come here and expand their experiences so they could better their community.
And in just the last year, Sac PD reinvested in community service officers, or CSOs. We were there for the first CSO graduation in 15 years.
We're taking young people, 18 through 22 years old, and giving them an opportunity to be a part of this organization for the next 30 years of their life. They come from the neighborhoods that we serve in this community: Strawberry Manor, Del Paso Heights, South Sacramento.
Those community service officers take cold reports such as burglary, stolen vehicles, and missing person investigations, freeing up a dwindling number of sworn officers to respond to priority calls.
At one point in like 2007 or so, we had 805 police officers. Now we're authorized 730, but we actually have like 660. We need black officers, we need women officers, we need Hispanic officers, we need white officers. We need all the officers we can get if they're good for our community.
All right, what grade would you give yourself, Chief?
Give myself? I wouldn't give myself a grade. You never give yourself a grade. Other people give you a grade.
No. If you got a chance to give yourself a grade based on the time that you've been in this position, what grade would you give yourself?
Well, I would just, the way I would think about that is what grade my mom would give me. And I would say, based on where we're at right now, maybe a C. Because we're not at a good place in our community, in every segment of our community.
Almost a year after the protest and controversy following the police shooting of Stephon Clark, the unarmed father of two killed by Sacramento police in his grandmother's backyard, the district attorney has yet to make a decision on the fate of those officers, and the chief claims he's committed to bridging the divide that exists between police and the community they serve.
When I give myself an A, which might never happen in my tenure, is when every neighborhood in our community feels a high level of trust for the police department, and the police department has a great relationship back and forth, and we're not there right now.
Still, the capital city's first African-American police chief tells me he feels his own life experiences prepared him to lead the department through this challenging time.
I want to go back to your upbringing. I mean, you were adopted, right?
I was.
And you tell me if the story is right, but some of the stories is the suggestion is you were born to an interracial family, black father, white mother, but your mother's family said, we're not going to have a black child, and you were put up for adoption.
I was.
How did, when you have that type of start, how does that impact who you are today?
That's why I know we can get where we need to be, because the community I grew up in and my mom, the way she operated and lived her life, she is the most unlikely person to adopt a black child. She grew up on a small farm in Minnesota, didn't see a black person until she was older. Yet she lived in Oak Park and raised me and was there for everybody. So I saw it on a daily basis, how we can do things together and how we can thrive because we do it together.
And there you have it. That concludes my 5-part series with Sacramento Police Chief Daniel Hahn. To watch all 5 episodes, just head to the ABC 10 YouTube page. We've created a playlist with the Hahn interviews.